Welcome to a PreventConnect podcast, where we explore the prevention of violence against women. This is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Hello, this is David Lee from PreventConnect, and I am really pleased to be able to have this conversation with three colleagues, or maybe I should say comrades of mine. As many of you know, I am one of the movement makers from the Move to End Violence initiative that's funded by the Novo Foundation, and I'm part of Cohort 3, and I'm here with the other male cohort members of Cohort 3, and we're going to be talking about our experiences from our international learning exchange, where we just returned from South Africa and learned so much in a very powerful experience. So I am joined here by Andrew Santana from Day One. How are you doing, Andrew?
Hey, I'm really well. I'm really glad to be able to join y'all.
Great, and I'm also joined by Quentin Walcott from CONNECT in New York City.
Hey, brothers, how are you? Glad to be part of this.
Great, and just so people know, we as everyone else calls Quentin Q, so we'll be referring to you as Q. And we're also joined by Ed Heisler from Men as Peacemakers over in Minnesota. Hi, Ed.
Hi, glad to be here.
Great. What did it mean for you to be in South Africa? And Q, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Well, it was a great experience. It was my second time on the continent and my first time in South Africa. And, you know, it was really like probably more in South Africa than when I was in Kenya, Nairobi. It was more of a sense of coming back home, just in terms of the history of South Africa, the history of the transatlantic slave trade, and also just, you know, the colonization of, African people, and then just experiences around that, and, you know, really learning a lot about apartheid. You know, someone who's like studied, African American and African history and of the diaspora, and thinking I had a knowledge of apartheid when I truly did not, and I learned so much by being in South Africa. But just, you know, feeling connected to the people there, and it was a sense of, you know, welcome home, you know, as a black male, and really, you know, I was able to really unite with the experiences of being someone who lives in the West in the United States, and, you know, having part of that black experience and being connected to the motherland. So it was really a great experience for me, and it was an emotional, it was a political, it was really a heartfelt and intellectual experience at the same time. So, and it was really great to connect with the people there who really, for some reason, they was from New York. To my accent, I don't know, but they really, everyone who found out I was from New York really asked me questions about Biggie Smalls and Nas and Mos Def, and part of the hip hop, you know, culture that is really worldwide now. So, but overall, it was really a great experience to be back home. And one thing that I really recognized was that, yes, we were part of the transatlantic slave trade, but then also part of this westernized thinking is that everything that is happening to Africans and black people are happening here in the United States. But actually, when we left the continent, there was a lot happening in South Africa and on the continent in ways that sometimes we tend to forget when we get caught up in our civil rights history here in the United States.
Well, thank you, Q. Ed, what about you? What was it like for you to be in South Africa?
It was amazing to be in South Africa. I was particularly excited. I had never been to the continent or to South Africa. I was excited by the reality that South Africa is a place that basically has had a successful revolution that brought down apartheid. And, you know, in the United States, we're a little bit less overt in how we understand institutionalized racism and the exploitation of folks who aren't white. So I was excited to be over there and learn from their experience successfully bringing down the apartheid system. But, you know, on a more personal note, it was also really powerful. You know, Q talks about experiences like coming home. And from my perspective, it was interesting being able to travel to the continent of Africa and South Africa in particular. So much of the Western world and the United States, sort of wealth is built off of exploiting the land, literally the people of the continent, including South Africa. we saw signs of that while we were over there. And so I really anticipated the sort of depth and the weight of the reality that for many people it was going to be an experience of coming home and reconnecting. And in my position, it was an experience of going to witness something that had leveraged sort of the white community's benefit in the United States, and that being a part of a group that was going through that process together was really a powerful thing.
Great. And Andrew, what was it like for you?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Q and Ed said, that South Africa was really profound and beautiful, and in many ways really transformative. I'll be honest, I had studied a bit about South Africa, but I'm often led by these kind of sort of popular culture understanding of South Africa. So post-apartheid, a country that had, gay marriage in 2006, a country that incorporated sexual orientation into their constitution in the 90s, but also has a legacy of things, right, in popular culture, like the murder of Riva Steenkamp by Oscar Pistorius. So it was an incredibly profound experience. As a queer person of color, thinking about even the terms that they use there around, the use of the term colored, right? And so, everything from visiting places where anti-Black racism was so explicit that it was written into, the kinds of food that Black folks got as like less nutritious than the food that colored people and white folks got. And I'm using colored intentionally as a term that is, was historically used in South Africa to describe, folks who were neither Black and white or mixed race and things like that. And so to kind of witness that and to kind of be a part of that were really profound. And I'm really looking forward to hearing all of y'all perspectives on that, including what it means for us as men in this movement to end violence against women and girls.
Well, thank you, Andrew. For me, it was South Africa and the anti-apartheid movement has been such an important part of my political upbringing. And I was involved in a very small way in the anti-apartheid movement, working towards divestment from South Africa and trying to be able to do that. And I remember the excitement in 1990 when Nelson Mandela was freed and came to Oakland, California, and we filled up the Oakland Coliseum. It was there were members of the Grateful Dead and Boogie Down Productions performing. But what was most powerful was hearing Nelson Mandela and our then Congressman Ron Dellums, who have been introducing divestment and sanctions legislation for so many years, being able to introduce and see the place in history. And being in South Africa, it was really great to hear people talking about the struggle and talking about their work towards liberation, and an acknowledgement of the international solidarity movement as being one of the four pillars that they talked about to be able to create the change. And it was really a profound place to be able to see, and then made me question, what role do I play and how do I fit in this? And so maybe that's the next place I want us to explore. And Andrew, you sort of started that, so I may start with you on this, is as men who were going here, and we were part of a delegation of, I think there was about 30 of us, and we were the four men in the delegation that was going, and we were meeting with a lot of groups, predominantly women's groups, though not exclusively, and we were talking about the work. And so what's your reflections about, as a man, about the work and some of the lessons that you've learned in South Africa?
Thanks. Thanks, David. There's so many profound lessons from South Africa, and particularly as a cisgender male, I think it's really important for me to think about what it was like to witness leadership, on a broad scale by women of color who were doing innovative and revolutionary things with a really deep analysis. And so it's funny. I wish I could say that there were one or two specific lessons, but what I think it brought up for me were just a number of questions about how I could translate and interpret some of the things that I learned here in the United States. And so, witnessing that leadership, right? I think in many ways there was a kind of openness, right, and an incorporation of music and dance and organizing at all levels of the work. And so whether that be, sort of engaging in an open mic at the Whole World Women's Association in Cape Town that included survivors and, us as participants, to, sort of interacting with young folks who are urban farmers and making connections between food sovereignty and food justice and gender-based violence. In that, when young people or people from a community or indigenous folks have the opportunity to grow their own food, what does that mean for empowerment? What does that mean for empowerment of women and girls? What does that mean for collaboration between young women and young men, right? So there are all of these things that came from that, which sort of led me to other questions, right? If I were to think boldly about this work, what would it mean to incorporate some of those lessons into the work we do here at Day One in the United States? It's definitely not lost on me that there's an absolute critical race analysis, as I mentioned earlier, with respect to anti-Black racism. It's really important for me to think about what does it mean to be intersectional and inclusive in this work? What does it mean to be gender inclusive in this work? What does it mean to use, gender inclusive terms over, say, gender neutral terms, right? Because we don't want to erase the existence of gender, but what does it mean to be inclusive of queer and trans folks in that? And so whether that be framing language, or how does that mean, what does that mean for rethinking our history? All of those things are questions that I've been bringing back to our work, because in South Africa, as a country, again, that has a history of really protecting LGBT people, at least formally within the Constitution, but also wrestles with things like, it sounds like a really enormous problem of corrective rape of lesbian women in their country as well. So, I think while it brought up so many questions, it really also brought up some opportunities for me to have conversations with folks here, and even on the folks on the call, about ways to move forward.
Right. Ed, what are some of your thoughts about as a man and how it reflects on the work that you and that you're thinking of for men as peacemakers?
Well, I would echo a lot of what Andrew just said, actually. That captures a lot of the big picture questions that were raised as a part of the experience. I always think about the fact it was an amazing opportunity to be in a space where we learned from so many other people, and had the opportunity to see one thing that I was always struck by, is that folks seem to have a lot of experience with organizing. They obviously, it's not too long since the apartheid revolution process sort of happened, and so the way in which they sort of systematically think about problems, how they're going to address them, how they pull together coalitions, things like that, was really interesting and cool to listen to. But one of the things that I pulled, Andrew mentioned the organizing, the music, the dance, the sort of joy, the community building that happens in a lot of their organizing and in a lot of their work. It made me think about the way in which sort of male dominance as a whole is an overarching issue that affects us in our country, that is a root cause of violence against women and girls, also violence against trans people, gay folks, white supremacy and male dominance kind of mixed together. And one of the things, the pillar that kind of holds all that together, is the way in which men, and particularly white, straight, cisgendered men, really hold up the value of the individual and the value of sort of building your own credibility, your own level of expertise, your own sort of transactional value within our system. And most of my experience in South Africa was based in a lot more sort of a collective approach, a community building approach, instances, whether we were talking about food justice or HIV/AIDS or specific violence against women issues. And so I think as a person who does identify as a white, straight, cisgendered man, the sort of value of being in that space and understanding that a part of what actually has the potential to create change in our society is adopting, joining, creating different ways of being in community together that value the collective, value the way in which we build community together in different ways, rather than a sort of savior, hero, leader sort of approach to this work. And South Africa was a great opportunity to take a step back and learn about that.
Thank you for listening to this PreventConnect podcast. PreventConnect is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, with funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views presented on PreventConnect are not necessarily the views of the United States government, the CDC, or CalCASA. To learn more about PreventConnect, visit www.preventconnect.org. For more information about CalCASA's mission, or to show your support, visit calcasa.org. That's CalCasa.org.